Greetings. My name is Louis Molina, and I'm the host of the Life Puro podcast. In today's episode, which marks the first of 2024, we decided to do things a little bit differently. It was actually at Nick's suggestion that we do some sort of mission statement episode, little solo episode. So we'll see where it takes us, and maybe we'll do something like this every year because also besides kind of talking about who we are, what we intend to do as a podcast, I want to do maybe an annual year in review, kind of like a State of the Union address for the cigar industry and maybe for our shops. And then finally, the last segment for this episode, I'd like to read an article that I co-wrote in 2007 regarding the New Orleans cigar industry around the, I think, 1880s, 1890s. So I wanted to share with you that today. So with that, we'll take it with today's cigar that I'll be smoking. You can see it right here. Maybe I'll get a little bit better view here from this angle. It's from Dunbarton, Steve Saka's Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust Company. It is a new cigar that was released this year called the Mi Querida Black Unicorn. So just looking up at our e-commerce site at shop.habanaport.com, if you're interested, you can purchase this cigar. Now, I want to warn you, we only have a few singles left. It's rather expensive, ultra premium. It's about $150 online per stick. And so I'm just warning people who maybe are interested in attaining this unicorn. So just to give you a little bit background, and this is coming from Steve Saka, so I'll kind of read you the company information that he published. So in 2017, the unicorn began as a pet project of mine gone awry. It was predicated on my disappointing experiences with dozens of individual uber rare cigars with price tags ranging from $100 to $3,000 over the years. In my opinion, the vast majority of these cigars were just marketing gimmicks, and even worse, many of them just plain sucked. So it got me thinking, what if I went whole hog crazy and did everything to the nth degree on the cigar itself? Meaning no bazillion dollar alcohol infusion or celebrity endorsements, but rather just focused on the tobacco and cigar itself. What could I possibly spend to make such a cigar? And would these costs justify the result? It turned out it cost way more than I expected and resulted in a $100 unique diademas. Granted, it was an amazing cigar, but who in their right mind would pay $100 for a cigar? I thought that would be the end of it. But here it is 5 years later, and every single year the demand grows, and we always sell out of our annual production of unicorns. For example, out of all the wide 2023 original Liga unicorns before March, it is crazy. Separate of that, I've been experimenting with crafting more unicorns in two of our most heralded and in-demand Ligas, the Sobremesa Brûlée Blue and the Mi Querida Black. And they are exceptional. True bliss to smoke. So I decided to make an extremely limited batch to once again share with our best purveyors. Plus, these are so delish. I couldn't help myself but to craft beautiful cabinets and coffins to display them. Sexy to look at, but even sexier to smoke. There are only 200 10-count cabinets of each Liga. And that's the end of his quote. So the Mi Querida Black, it's a Connecticut broadleaf wrapper, so darker wrapper. I've never smoked it, so this will be my first time. I've been wanting to smoke it. I think we got this a few months ago, not that long ago. I think in October or November of 2023. So it's got a few weeks of just settling down in our humidor. So I think she'll be ready to go. So we got my coffee here. I'm going to get it cut and lit. So it measures 6 1/4 inches by a 60 ring gauge. And as he had mentioned, it's a diadema. So that means it tapers on both sides at the head and the foot, tapers to a point and kind of has that bulging center. So with that, I will, for this one, I'm going to decide to go with a soft flame light just because I want to be a little bit more delicate with this cigar. So that'll light our cigar match. Get a little bit of that edge. And we're good. So just to let our viewers know, I did smoke the other unicorn, the Sobremesa Brulee, and I think I smoked that on Christmas Day, and it was nice. It was a milder blend, sweet. It has it's a shade grown wrapper. We have a picture of it on our e-commerce site for both of these. So if anyone's interested or just curious about looking at it, feel free to go to shop.habanaport.com and just type in unicorn in the search box, and you'll see them come up. So as I'm smoking this, I will kind of give you updates. But right now, it's got a nice, pretty clean finish start. It's slight spice, but not as much as I was expecting. And yeah, it definitely has more of like almost like a slight nutty coffee profile. Is just the best way to describe it. I mean, I know that's, descriptors for like every cigar, but that's kind of the notes that it reminds me of. But yeah, so we'll let's start by just kind of, I'd like to go over, what our purpose is as a podcast. What do we hope to achieve? What are some of our goals? What do you as a listener or viewer hope to gain from, committing your time to listening to us? And basically, and I may have mentioned some of these points throughout some of the episodes, so I apologize for kind of being repetitious, but or repetitive. But I do want to kind of stress it today. What's the purpose of our podcast? What is our mission statement? So about 6 years ago, I had the idea of, let's execute in producing a podcast, a high quality podcast. At the time, though, unfortunately, we were in a smaller store, smaller footprint, so we didn't really have the infrastructure, I felt, to engage in producing good, high quality podcast episodes. I mean, we tried with like a little recorder. We were just going to do only audio at first, even though I knew that, you had to include some video. It's a little bit more effective. And, we actually recorded some industry people. Liana Fuente, for example, had come to visit us, and we recorded, her visit with us. She gave us some of our outlooks on their company, on their business. So it was pretty interesting. Liana Fuente being the daughter of Carlito Fuente, and from Arturo Fuente Cigars. We had Tom Lazuka come on, but when we just, and we had him on during this iteration of the podcast, but even before that, he was gracious enough to sit down and give us an interview, just audio. So, but it wasn't effective. And in addition, we didn't have the technical expertise, the know-how to, edit, distribute the audio. So I always felt that we were kind of stuck, even though I wanted to really move forward with a podcast. So fast forward to June of 2022, we move into this brand new space in our Baton Rouge market, and it's an awesome store. So if you ever have a chance to swing by Baton Rouge, visit us. We're at 4715 Perkins, which is essentially at the corner of Perkins and College, which are more traveled thoroughfares in Baton Rouge. So it's a 4,000 square foot building, 2,000 square foot of which is a walk-in humidor. So as soon as you walk in the store, you're in a walk-in humidor. So we have a large selection. We have a private lounge in the back, which is about 1,800 square foot. And then we have this room that we're in. It was a little too small for us to, kind of use for a member or two, but we had the idea, you know what? This is now the space we can use and utilize to produce a good podcast. It's on site in the store, small enough to where we can utilize it, and then bring on industry guests or other clients or friends or anyone who wants to come on the podcast. And so we invested the money to redo the space, get the equipment. We even hired our first and still current producer, Nick Fruin, who was on a previous episode, to really engage and execute on this podcast. So we're pretty happy with the way it's been going. And, like I said, the idea for the podcast came about 6 years ago, but how do we differentiate ourselves, right? How do we make ourselves look different than the other cigar podcasts? And it's not to malign any other cigar podcast, but how are we going to attract viewers or listeners? So besides just, like these reviews, podcasts or sites, we basically wanted to take the cigar shop banter and talks that you hear in every lounge and shop and humidor and kind of give our listener a glimpse of that. Over the years, there have been a lot of anecdotes, interesting characters that have come through the cigar shop scene. And it's just, it's entertaining. It's fun. That's kind of the beauty of working in this industry. And so I wanted to kind of convert that over to the podcast form and allow, people who maybe don't go to cigar shops get a sense of what it's like to be in the cigar shop scene. Also, the fact that we're a retailer and in the industry gives us a different perspective than just an end consumer review. We talk to the manufacturers. We're in the industry. We're have a pulse on what's going on. And we also talk to consumers. So we're that last bridge, from seed to smoke. And we felt that giving our insight into what we do could be valuable, educational, and even entertaining to our listeners and viewers. So in addition to our point of view, we were trying to think, well, instead of just catering to the cigar listener or consumer, we wanted to have a broader reach. And so we thought, in addition to talking about cigars, we'd like to talk about other hobbies or interests that a lot of cigar smokers share. So think of travel, fashion, food, wine, etc. So look at, for upcoming episodes where we talk to other, industry people, think about bourbon, golf, things like that. And in doing so, we felt that we could have a broader reach for an audience base than just cigar people. Not that we don't love cigar people, but, to kind of promote just the good lifestyle. So that's where the Life Puro came to fruition. So it's kind of a double entendre, the Puro being the term that for a cigar in the Cuban world, but also the pure, the good life, the pure life. So that's essentially, some of the reasoning behind and, how we planned to execute the production of this podcast. So we feel that our motto perfectly captures these sentiments in that the Life Puro is a weekly podcast aimed at discussing the finer aspects of life. So we hope that you'll get that sense as well. And as I mentioned, we know it won't be easy. I mean, think about some of the now really popular podcasters. I mean, it took them years, hundreds, if not thousands of episodes to get to where they are. So I knew that we weren't going to get instant fame right away. And that's not our goal, to get fame, but, to get our message out. But based on the analytics and the growth we're seeing with listeners, we're pretty optimistic. We're pretty happy with our performance thus far. As I mentioned, we've done 24 episodes, 26 technically, because one of the episodes was divided into 3 parts. And it's been pretty fun, but, impressive to see the growth that we've achieved. So we're pretty positive. We have a good outlook. We're, anticipating what's coming up for this year. So we're really excited, and we hope that you will be too. Another factor I wanted to discuss is the fact that, this podcast isn't tied to any or beholden to any outside sponsors. The interesting thing about that is that it allows us to, talk about what we want to talk about, not be censored, essentially. So it's kind of liberating, and you've heard some guests speak freely, maybe drop a swear word or two. So to me, it's a freedom of expression that's going on, and I think that's pretty cool. And so hopefully, I know there's been talk in government and Congress to maybe start regulating podcasts. So, hopefully that doesn't occur. But as long as we can, we'll continue to try to produce good episodes and have interesting or at least entertaining guests. So as I said, it's, we know it's not going to be easy. We continue to improve our production techniques. We know we started really basic, simple, and we continue to improve and figure this out because, a lot of it we're all learning, Nick included, our producer. Another thing I want to discuss is, the podcast represents Habana Port's marketing budget. So it's a great vehicle by which we can, have a tax write-off, being that this is a true marketing and advertising expense. Having been a small business owners for some years, it used to be that a lot of companies and brands have implemented what's called push marketing. So think about radio ads, TV ads, billboards, these vehicles that push their message to the viewer or listener. And ever since social media has come about, podcasts have exploded. We're now in this climate of pull marketing, right? So companies or brands like us that can now create our own content, hopefully making it intriguing for the viewer to stay tuned. We're pulling in people. And to me, that can be pretty effective and producing some good engagement. But one of the factors that we as an industry have to contend with is that, big tech doesn't like tobacco, right? There are a lot of prohibitions on, tobacco companies. So we've never been able to pay for like a promoted post, which would be nice. We would love to spend that money, but just because of the policies of these big tech companies, it's really prohibitive. But anyway, we can try to produce our own podcast, and if it's engaging enough, we hope that people would share the message and these posts in order to get our word out. And really, the whole point of this podcast is to advertise our website, our e-commerce platform. We have 2 brick and mortar locations, one in Metairie, which is right outside New Orleans, and here in Baton Rouge. But the e-commerce platform has been a big initiative for us the last few years. And we hope that if you do like our content and you'd like to support us, please visit our website and shop. In fact, there are some episodes where we'll drop in a discount code or in the description, in the YouTube description. So that way it'll give us a real sense, of analytics of how each podcast episode is performing. We'll be able to see an ROI, right? So that's pretty effective too for small businesses or even big brands. So please, if you want to share our podcast with friends, family, or other networks, please do so. And at this time, I'd like to thank everyone who's tuned in thus far. It really means a lot to us, and we appreciate that. So if you do like what you've been listening to or seeing, please share and spread the message. So I want to thank you for your support in that. So with that, let's go to our next segment. This might be the annual piece, kind of like a State of the Union address, if you will. So we'll call it Why 2023 Review, or the Year in Review. And, in this segment, I'll kind of give you a little glimpse of our business performance, maybe the performance for the industry, and maybe some predictions and forecasts for the coming year. So, yeah, forget not having a guest. I got to keep talking. My cigar is going to go out a lot, so maybe this wasn't the right cigar to go with because I'm not giving it a fair chance. But I'll try to keep up doing both. So anyway, just to give you a sense of how 2023 went for us, between the three outlets, right? Our two physical stores and e-commerce site, we saw growth. And we saw pretty good moderate growth. A little bit more than usual. But I think what was going on was that you have to consider the inflationary rate, right? So the cost of goods sold increased a little bit higher than average. In a normal year, we'll see the cost of cigars go up anywhere from 1% to 3%, sometimes 5%, but that's pretty rare. But this year, we saw a higher than average inflationary rate. A lot of companies went up 5%, 7%, and in some cases, 10%. So it's a higher than average growth rate in terms of prices. And I can kind of give you some insight into maybe why that is based on our talks with certain industry folk. But I wanted to bring that up because even though we saw growth, I mean, was it real growth? So taking into account the inflation based on our growth rate, I'd say we were just a little bit above than flat. So it was still good, but it wasn't as satisfactory, I guess, when you put the inflation rate into it. So every shop really should have seen growth this year, at least in the U.S. market, given the price increases. But yeah, that's where our company performance stood in 2023. There's a lot of hope for our e-commerce site. There's a lot more potential for that. So we're hoping to continue our growth expansion in at least that channel. And what I forecast in terms of sales growth for 2024, I think from the manufacturer standpoint, I think they're going to see either flat or even declining numbers in terms of imports. And for retailers, it'll probably be about a flat, maybe slightly up. And why do I think this? So what I look at in order to get a good sense or gauge of how manufacturers are doing, I look at the frequency of discounting. So it's no secret there are manufacturers that offer discounts from time to time. But when I see a manufacturer not offering discounts like they, like what was going on about 2 years ago, to me, that signals that there's no incentive for a manufacturer to offer a discount. That means demand is high. It's up. And that's what we saw, especially during the lockdowns when unexpectedly the consumption of cigars went up. And it's because, people didn't really take into account that people would be working from home. And as a result, they had more time to smoke a cigar, on their back deck while they're on their laptop working. So cigar consumption increased. And as a result, the sales volume, the turn increased. And finally, as a result, manufacturers weren't incentivized to offer discounts. And you didn't see that because a lot of them were out of stock. They were back ordered on a lot of items. So when you see that the pause in discounting occur, to me that signals that sales are up, import numbers are up. But once you start to see discounts or sales offered, that's when, in my opinion, the signal is sent that, okay, maybe us importers have a little bit too much stock. We need to move this product, keep it going. So I think that's what started maybe a year and a half ago, is that the growth rate, it's kind of flattened, and these importers and manufacturers had to move stock. So they didn't, they started to offer a little bit more discounts. And then this past year, we saw a little bit more of that. So I predict for 2024, cigar import numbers will be flat or maybe even decline, unless, a recession does hit, which from all indications, I don't really see that happening. That the bundled sector, like the bundled cigar market, goes up, right? We saw a lot of that too the last few years where, brands like Factory Smokes really took over in terms of volume. So that might be one of the factors that goes on, where if import numbers, the actual number of sticks increases, it's because of those kind of cigars. But like dollar amount, I think would be flat to decreasing. Another factor to consider is the geopolitical instability in Latin America. I don't think enough consumers take that into account. So if you don't know, a lot of the cigars are rolled in Latin America. So that includes countries like Nicaragua, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica even. And one has to contend, or at least consider, the geopolitical situation in those countries, right? Is the government stable? What's the gang situation like? Even the political atmosphere. So, for example, will Nicaragua have to contend with some issues with President Ortega, who's been in office since I think 2007, and before that, the Nicaraguan president was only allowed to have or serve a 5-year term, just once. But I think they could serve a second one, but it had to be non-consecutive. But if they had won that second non-consecutive term, they would have to, I guess, retire from running for that office. But he's been on since then, and there have been reports of human rights abuses, some interesting things going on there. Even rumors that the U.S. might implement another Nicaraguan embargo like they did, I think, in the 80s or early 90s. So I think the industry will have to look at that again. I'm sure they're always looking at that. It's just these aren't things that you necessarily hear of. So will the Nicaraguan geopolitical situation be a factor for 2024? We'll just have to keep an eye. And I think that's why the Dominican Republic has been more compelling the last few years, for people to produce brands or produce cigars there, because it is a lot more stable. It's been stable for decades. So anyone who wants to enter the market, say as a producer or a brand maker, might have to consider Dominican Republic for producing their cigars. Let's see what else. Oh, podcasts. Yeah, that was a big trend this past year. I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. This is our first year, or has been our first year into entering this endeavor. And I predict as more shops, get a hold of how to execute a podcast, you'll see more productions, and also from end consumers, manufacturers. I mean, we've already seen it the last maybe 4 or 5 years. So that trend will continue. Let's see what else. Prices. I mean, I don't see a slowdown in price increases. Like I said, typically we see 1 to 3% every year. But I'm predicting about 3 to 5% inflation rate for cigars and the cost of goods sold. One factor as to why we're seeing an increase, some people and consumers especially might say, oh, it's just greed. Well, there are a few things going on. And you'll hear our next guests maybe kind of talk about it. But there are a few factors. One, the labor shortage is a real thing. So what I mean by that, like cigar rollers or tobacco laborers, a lot of these individuals in Latin America are leaving those countries for the United States. So there's a real labor shortage occurring in our industry, especially from the manufacturing side. So with that, a lot of these factories have to lure um, other rollers or their current rollers by increasing their wages. You see a lot of these countries that have mandates on increasing their salary every year, but I'm sure there's some manufacturers who increase the wages even more than they're legally required to, just to keep, current or attract new rollers. So that's one factor. Another is the price of shipping containers. That has exploded since the lockdowns. And the price of shipping containers, I think, has put real pressure on increasing the prices of cigars. So I think that'll continue. Let's see, what else do I have here as my cigar goes out again. I think we'll see an explosion of new brands, as the FDA kind of signals, or at least the courts signal, that, the FDA regulations won't come down hard as maybe as once expected. I expect to see more brands coming out, more interest from people to offer their own cigar. You'll continue to see shops like ours offer our own exclusive brands. I mean, that's a strategy that we've implemented for years now, but this upcoming year, you'll really see that revved up, at least from us too, because, for the past year, I think about maybe a year and a few months, we've been working to start offering our first, like, truly premium cigar. We've been planning and executing this for like the past year, like I said. So, that's just to offer something that differentiates us from other competitors, and also to maintain customer loyalty, especially with the competition of the internet. That is a strategy. I mean, a tip for other shops that, if you want to maintain your relevance, start offering your own brands. Go to these factory partners and see if they'll make you a cigar. Now, a lot of the requirements are pretty high, especially now that you've had some shortages, but also these manufacturers aren't really incentivized to make private labels anymore because it's just a lot more work. Maybe a distraction in some cases, but if you can get your own cigar brand made, that would definitely help out a shop, and also you can help improve your margins. So I expect an explosion of new brands, not just from cigar shops, but other people who want to, be a brand maker. And that'll definitely be more difficult for those entrants because, as is usual, and has been the case in our industry, the shelf space is very limited in humidors. So new entries will have to offer some sort of compelling incentive or reason as to why a shop should pick them up. Let's see what else. So, and there might be other X factors or unknown factors that we haven't considered. What will AI, how will that play out for our industry? I mean, it is an old world industry. You're dealing with a product that really hasn't changed in, over 500 years. But will AI have an effect on our industry? One thing I've thought of is, will a lot of these AI or software programs view our industry as a negative, right? As a liability? Will they, because they're influenced maybe by tech companies who naturally just aren't, pro tobacco, will that kind of teach or kind of steer AI to having a negative view on our industry? For example, I had asked ChatGPT something earlier last year, about the cigar trade, and they gave me some information, but they almost seem to have a commentary at the end, saying something to the notion that, you should consider the adverse effects of using tobacco or this product. So that kind of got me thinking, I mean, what are some of the consequences or potential effects of that? So that's just an interesting notion. And then let's see, some favorite cigars of ours, I like to talk about. We used to have a top 5 list of our own. We've kind of gotten away from that, but maybe we can use this opportunity. I'll kind of list some favorite cigars that I've smoked this past year. Espinosa's Warhead, that's an annual release. And this past year was the number 9. That was one of my favorites. So that's one to consider. It's an annual offering, and every year is a different blend. So if you're interested, try that out. The Metapa line from Foundation was really good. That's from Nick Molino's Foundation Cigar Company, and I particularly like the Maduro version of it a little bit more. He has that offered in a claro, which means like a lighter shade version, and then there's a darker version called the Maduro, and I particularly like the Maduro. So those are some favorite cigars of mine this past year. And so let's see, the next segment I kind of want to discuss and kind of keep it interesting is to talk about and maybe read from the article I co-wrote with an individual back in 2007, which talks about the cigar industry in New Orleans over 100 years ago. A lot of people will look at Tampa as the cigar city, and as it should be, but a lot of people don't realize New Orleans actually had that title right before Tampa. Being that it was a major port city in the U.S. and still is today, it lent to the perfect situation for cigar factories to pop up and base their location. And we had, quite a number of cigar factories in the early 1900s and late 1800s. So I'd like to take the time now to, read from that article. It was fun too, doing the research for that article. I had a chance to go to this library in the French Quarter called the Keller Research Center. So I want to thank them again for allowing me to visit their library and do the research. And while I was doing that, and the librarians were really helpful, and they assisted me in the research. They gave me these books, or lent me these books to kind of peruse, and microfilm of newspapers from the late 1800s. And it was interesting. I got a sense that New Orleans back then was a major city. It was probably neck and neck with New York in terms of the population numbers, the affluence, the importance. It wasn't until, certain factors, primarily the first one being a hurricane in the 1920s, that really started the decline of that city. And there are a lot of other factors and a lot of theories, but that's for another episode. But anyway, it was cool to read some of the literature, the articles, the books about that time period. And in doing so, I got a sense that, New Orleans was a major cigar industry player. So here's the article. It's from Where You At. It's from, it's a local kind of magazine. I think it's a monthly newspaper out of New Orleans, still in production, publication today. And this is from their, I think January, their January 2007 issue, volume 8, issue 9. So with that, I will read some excerpts from the article, and it's titled Cigars, Nola's Lost Industry by John Breerwood and Louis Molina. Come New Year's Day, you won't have to decide whether or not to sit in the smoking section. The state legislature already made that decision with the ban that will essentially rid smoking in all restaurants, including the bar areas. Statewide, smokers call bullshit while non-smokers claim justice. However, for those of us who detest cigarettes but love cigars, it's not so black and white. Though many people find cigars disgusting, their history can at least be appreciated. In recent years, the tobacco business has been seen as the scourge of society. Yet, not long ago, it created a surge of industry that built economy within the nation, state, and especially our own Crescent City. Before Tampa took the crown, New Orleans was the nation's cigar capital during the golden age of cigars, 1880s to 1930s, when 4 out of every 5 men in the U.S. smoked a cigar. The Port of New Orleans procured the raw materials from Cuba needed to make cigars, including clear Havanas, which is an American-made cigar with all Cuban tobacco. By 1903, 27 local factories generated an annual $3.5 million from tobacco and cigar exports. Altogether, about 1,200 New Orleanians worked in the cigar industry at that time, and most were women. Women found consistent work and good pay as cigar rollers. Many of the factories were located within the French Quarter. These included Jose Vega Cigar Factory, which was on the corner of Bourbon and Conti, Mr. George Alsace's cigar manufactory, corner of Rampart Street between St. Anne and Dumaine, W.B. Shearer at 237 Royal Street, and A. Ribeirou, 24 St. Anthony Street, between Royal and Charters. As important as these manufactories were in the city, none compared to the king of cigar making, Simon Hernsheim of S. Hernsheim Brothers and Company. His cigar brands and concerns were so far-reaching and important to the city's economics that his factory was praised in Memoirs of Louisiana in 1892. Quote, "There is no industry in the South, nor in the North, nor in any part of the United States that is blessed with more of the broad-gauged humanity of its organizers, that is enriched with a more complete record of justice, equity, and fellowship than the great institution of which it is our pleasure here to record." End quote. Erected in 1882 at the corner of Magazine and Julia Streets, the factory was an immense structure, 5 stories high. The factory employed 361 men and 726 women, and an additional 100 employees in the office and on the road. In 1892, they produced 40 million cigars. The Hernsheim factory was the largest cigar manufacturer in the country at that time. His most popular brands included El Belmont, La Belle Creole, and Jackson Square. Their quality was world famous, and Hernsheim exported to England, Germany, Mexico, and other Central American countries. Mr. Simon Hernsheim was born in New Orleans on March 4th, 1839. He started working in the tobacco business in 1857 by supplying the leaf for the European market, but later enlisted in the Confederate Army. After the war, he built his cigar empire. Simon Hernsheim donated to charitable organizations and did what he could to empower the city of New Orleans. His tobacco earnings commissioned what is now the Columns Hotel in St. Charles. His heirs donated $50,000 to the New Orleans Public Library in 1902, of which $40,000 was directly invested in the Hernsheim Fund to generate interest for the library's future. After his death in 1898, Hernsheim's dynasty faded away. M. Trellis and Company, 701 South Peters Street, and Jose Escalante y Compañía, 1018 Poe Fair Street, took over as the leading factories in New Orleans. Trellis's famous brands include Great Southern Cigar, El Trellis, and Keep Moving, which is still in production today as a mass-market machine-made cigar. The factories closed shop in the mid-20th century due to the minimum wage laws, which made cigar rolling too expensive in the U.S. Of course, when Castro thought nuclear arms were more important than his country's thriving tobacco industry, JFK imposed the Cuban economic embargo, which may have saved us from a really hot summer, but ultimately doomed the domestic handmade cigar industry. Though the glory of the cigar industry in the Crescent City has burned out, local retailers keep the tradition of cigar smoking alive. And despite the recent bans, cigar consumption continues to boom in the United States. Whatever anyone says, the tobacco industry helped found this country and city, and despite the cigarette company's recent infamy. Some may regard cigar smoke as foul, but its past speaks for itself. And that's it. And I should put a picture of the factory, the S. Hernsheim factory, for the podcast. So we'll get that there, hopefully included. So yeah, this was written at a time when Yeah, I forgot that the smoking bans came down in New Orleans and Louisiana, which was, at the time kind of interesting. Um, before then you could smoke in bars uh, and restaurants that allowed it, but it was during that time that the state legislature implemented that smoking ban. So, yeah, this will conclude today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. I'll try to do an annual cigar review or state of the industry um, kind of address for maybe the first episode of every year. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And we appreciate you tuning in today. Until the next episode, take care.